Start. All right, guys. So welcome to this session. We still have one person absent, so we'll see when they fall in. So let's look at the preface and chapter one presentation. Are you guys seeing this?
Yes, sir.
All right. Is it large enough for you? Is that large enough for you guys?
Yeah, that is fine.
Yeah. All right. So I know the one that I had online was with me discussing it already. So um, hopefully it added some explanation along the way, so that we're just going to try and review a little quicker to see if we can do some of chapter one and the preface, and then move to see how much of chapter two. You realize that the presentations are quite long, yes? And that's because the first part of the text is very dense in terms of what it explores. The subsequent chapters tend not to be as dense. All right. So we had talked about this last before. Everybody was able to download their course outline. So we said that it was going to be an introductory course, which is emphasis on the word introductory. So we're not going to be going into heavy analysis of various leadership models, but we're going to be focusing our attention on one particular model. And the one thing that I wanted to point out to you was, in terms of our learning objectives, we have a number of them here, but the one that we we wanted to talk about more is the so we wanted to talk about the fact that we're looking at behavior modification here. And we talked about what behavior modification was. What do people understand behavior modification to do? You all would have done that in OB, for those of you who did it before. What do we understand by behavior modification?
Is an approach to correct errant behavior.
Correct error behavior, right? And how is behavior modified? What causes us to modify behavior? Or what
They look at things like they look at the learning models in terms of reinforcing positive behavior and punishing negative behavior.
right?
That's what I remember. It was five steps in the behavior modification model.
Right.
I remember
Now,
that.
all right. So I know, for example, Aisha, did you do management, MOB, management of business at A
Yes,
level?
I did.
So you came across behavior modification models,
I cannot recall that.
right? So when you do organizational behavior, you'll probably come across that in the future. But what we're talking about here is from a very simple exercise: is how do you get people to change? So you either change people's behavior by utilizing what, and I don't know who was talking there. So guys, you kind of have to identify yourself, because once I have the presentation running, I can't see what's happening outside on the presentation page. So you can change people's behaviors by what is called external influences. So there was an experiment that was done, called Pavlov's dog, where anytime they fed the dog, they would ring a bell, so that they were conditioning. So it's called conditioned behaviors, or conditioned reaction or responses. So they got the dog so accustomed to this bell and the food, that every time they rang the bell, the dog had expectations of receiving a meal, and the dog would start to display um, salivation and so on, with the expectation that they're going to get food whenever a bell was rung. So that's a form of behavior modifying. Another way that we modify behavior is through punishment or rewards. So like for example, when you were growing up as a child, when you all were growing up as children, especially if you were growing up in the 60s and 70s, even into the 80s, a lot of our motivation for changing behavior was khatas, right? Would you guys agree? In the modern parenting age, punishment of that nature, especially the severity that some of us may have experienced in the past, um, has been reduced. Although I still see some parents full believers in it. But in this particular course, I can't beat you all to make you all change your behavior and thinking. We're hoping that we can use what is referred to as internal stimulus for behavior modification, which is the behavior changes that really hold over time would be those changes that we want to make. So what we're looking for is internal motivation to change behavior. So the only way that we can get that is to start to use things like reasoning and logic and get people to agree to why they're looking at making these types of changes. And therefore it's something that you want to make on your own, as opposed to changes that you are forced to make because we told you so. That makes sense, guys? Um, the,
Yes.
the the very critical thing about this though is that this type of learning outcome as a course objective is one of the higher end learning outcomes, and this is why this course is usually best placed closer to the end of a program than it is at the beginning of a program. So I guess, Ms. McIntyre, you're going to get kind of in reverse action. So this is something that you could keep in mind where you're going through the program. You start to realize that hopefully you can begin to make more positive changes in terms of the impact of this course on your life and your attitude towards leadership and so on. All right, so let's move along from here. So these are the two textbooks. So the two downloads that you have are the Exploring Leadership text, which is the main text, and then we are doing a couple of chapters out of the leadership experience from the DAFT. So those are the two textbooks that we're going to explore a number of chapters. So this is an exploration of the first chapter already, and we started off by looking at looking. So this kind of speaks to the background of why this course existed. Or was created. This course was created primarily roughly about 2009, 2010. And what we found is that we had a leadership course on ethics class, a business ethics class in the past. And what we realized was that we were having situations in our life around us. We just went through the 2008 financial crisis, and then we had the follow-on impact of that here in Trinidad. And what was noticed was that there was a distinct breakdown of leadership, and especially leadership with good ethical values. So there was a need for us to look at leadership style and leadership development in the Caribbean context, regionally and locally in particular, because it appeared as if the leaders that surrounded us were not the best examples of what leadership should look like. So this was one of the reasons why this course was developed, because we saw a lack of proper and positive leadership models around us. And from 2010 to now, things really haven't changed that much. Would you agree with that? Although we can see pockets of that type of thing in other situations, but honestly, it really hasn't changed that much. Would you guys agree with that situation?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
You are correct.
So the idea of developing this course was for us to be able to try to help to influence people who are coming up in the system to begin to develop better leadership ideas and hold themselves to better ethical standards than what we're currently seeing here, values and judgment. So the idea is that you guys all going to be part of the leadership that will exist in the world going forward. Because as the older guard dies off or retires from the offices and organizations, new people will come on. And what we're hoping is that we will be able to influence the type of leadership that comes into the future. So the idea is behavior modification is the outcome. But what we're looking for is we're looking for it to have long-term impact. All right, so that takes us into how the textbook defines what is leadership. And it defines leadership as a relational and ethical process of people attempting to accomplish something positive. Now, we know that leadership is not only about positive things. You have leadership for negative things as well. But the way the book wants us to look at it is that leadership is about two things in particular. It's primarily about the first thing is the relationships you develop with people, and the way in which you develop those relationships has to be governed by some sort of ethical process or ethical values. Now, I know for you guys in MGPS, you all have already done ethics. So there's been a fair amount of assessment of ethical models and ethical value systems. That's correct, guys?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, we did that, sir.
All right. So the hope here would be that we'll bring some of those processes, models, and modeling to influence your view of what leadership is going to be and how leadership is affected by those 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 values that you hold. All right, and that's something that we want to pay attention to. But if you think about those leaders who you have had good or you feel good about, think about the nature of the relationship you have with them, or have had with them. And this could be from personal leadership in terms of your family. It could be an organizational, where you're talking about leadership in terms of within your organization where you work, or it could be even in the context of your school system where you've interacted with leaders. And you have to think about which were the leaders that you worked with or people in leadership positions that you felt that you were getting having a good situation or good feeling with. How was the what was the relationship like? Was the relationship one that was very strained, one-sided, or did you feel that you could communicate with the individual freely and discuss things openly without judgment and without feeling as if you were indebted to the individual? There was no guilt issues that were faced. How does that feel for you guys? I mean, in terms of understanding the relational aspect of leadership. Feedback here is going to be important, guys.
In my experience, the leaders that I would have worked with, who I was more inclined to follow willingly, would have been those who had that open line of communication. They welcomed communication, they welcomed ideas, feedback, and that sort of thing. Not those who would really impose their position on you, that you have to do what they say, when they say, how they say, that sort of thing, you know.
And what is more common for you to find in your experience?
The latter.
The one that wants you to do things as they say when they say.
Yes. Well, I would expect that to some extent in our line of work, right? Because I think that that's the way they would have been groomed. That's the traditional paramilitary sort of way of commanding that sort of cooperation from the subordinates.
Yep. I can understand that thinking. Have there, however, been people that you've dealt with who treated with it differently though, within the national security background that you're coming from, or that military type background that you're coming from?
Yes, there have been. There have been.
Right. So therefore, it's not a given that it has to be that way. But
No, but
there is,
you're more find the softer approach, to me at least, from the more senior positions. The
right.
ones who are more directly in charge of you, who directly over you, they might be a little more forceful. Whereas the ones who, at least that's my experience, I don't know for the other guys, the ones who
Well,
might be a little higher up, they don't seem to be too much on that imposing that kind of authority on
what
you,
what what
because
what
the
rank?
authority is understood.
Right. What rank are you at?
I'm at a sergeant rank, and in prisons it's called PO2.
All right. Okay. That's what I was wondering. So when you say higher rank, what are you referring to there?
Like
Like
from
commander levels and stuff?
ASPs, superintendents, senior superintendents go up. It
Uh,
seems as though the higher up they go, their rank speaks for itself. So they don't need to be so actively involved in imposing their authority on you. Their authority is understood.
all right. So
Where
do you think that they're utilizing that authority as a big stick then to make sure that you respect the office and not the individual kind of thing?
I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say so. Like I said, the fact that they are already at that rank, they have attained that position.
Uh,
That speaks for itself. The position speaks for itself. So they tend to be a little more relaxed in their
the
personality.
exercising of their leadership. All right.
Right.
And what about the decisions that they make? How do you feel that they've arrived at those decisions? And how those decisions are rolled out to the rest of us, to the rest of people in the organization or under their charge?
Let's
Because
go on
that's
YouTube, right? Let's go on YouTube, right?
it's going only for us, guys. So, all right. So I'll paraphrase this to so that you don't go and risk yourself. Most times what you find happening is when people get to higher levels, the expectation is that when they make a decision and they inform the chain of command then enforces that decision without question. Am I right?
More or less. More or
Correct.
less.
So that
Yes, Mr. Misu.
the higher up in an organization that somebody goes, the less of the, I would have to call it the dirty work that has to be done. This is a decision that was taken at the top with or without consensus from the followers or from the people inside the organization. And honestly, your feedback is of no concern to them. And that is the problem that we tend to face when we deal with leadership. Regardless of how people behave, they can be unethical in their approach to leadership decision making, especially when the decisions are made without consulting people inside the organizational structure. That makes sense. That reflects something of what may actually be taking place around you. Yes.
Mr. Bisu, the police, well, police and prison, we have a hierarchical structure for so many reasons, and which is understood. And we are also an arm of the government, and a lot of the decisions that and policies that we have to follow and I think are handed down by the government.
Correct.
So, and a lot of times we don't have a decision, but you remember the higher we go, as you said, there's a gap. But we were also one time directly supervising, and
Yes.
and when you
But
read the well, and going, I mean, we will be getting into the contents of the program, but the paradigm shift. It has been a paradigm shift to me in the police service when I came in 1988 to 2021 now. And those in the earlier days was do as I say and don't do as I do. Now there are discussions, there are interactions, they ask for your opinions on many matters and in decision making matters also. What I can say from the police service is that when decisions are made, when decisions are handed down, you explain the reason why. Their goals are not. We have a operating plan, 2021 to 2023, I believe,
A strategic
And
plan, yeah.
yeah, and a lot of the goals and objectives that are in there, they are explained and they are broken down into smaller pieces, and therefore all of the members of the service. So when you get once a decision is made and you tie it in with the goals and objectives, it is easier to accept from the junior people. All right.
Right, but Richard, what you're talking about there is evolution of leadership
Right.
techniques, right?
Yeah.
Rudy, what do you want to ask?
Good day, sir. Good day, class.
See your hand up.
Yes, sir. What hearing me, right, sir?
Yes, we are.
Right. What along what the lines what Bertie was saying, I would agree with that. But concerning the prison service, at the end of the day, both services are being run politically, the political will of the government. What the government wants, at the end of the day, those instructions are passed on to the commissioner. The commissioner leeway is adjusted by, the commissioner has leeway, but that is affected by his budget. Now, the police can afford to have a certain amount of leeway because they have the budget to affect the will of the commissioner. With prisons, our budget is very limited, and we depend on nearly everything we want from the government. And if the government decides that they want this, we have to do it. And we can't get around that by saying, well, we can afford to run this program or run that program and see what the outcome is. We cannot afford to do that. So at the end of the day, if the government or the minister tells the commissioner, here, this is what you have to do, this is what you have. The commissioner will come, it will trickle back down to us, the PO2s, the supervisors and the PO2s, and we will have to inform our junior officers, here, it have nothing to get. You have to do it this way or not. And that is leadership in the prison service.
All right, thank you. Because as I said before, in a lot of instances, the leadership model that has been utilized hasn't changed in a lot. But what may have taken place is really a bit of a morphing, because it becomes more difficult to expect that people will just simply follow what you say without trying to justify it. So especially as we become more educated about these type of situations. Dale, you wanted to say something?
Mr. Bissou, there has been a shift from being authoritarian to...
I would agree with you, yes.
Yeah.
But has it been significant enough for us to say that we have arrived at a higher level of ethical value? And that remains to be seen when we look at the model and stuff. But I see Dale's mic is open, so I was wondering if Dale wanted to say something.
Yeah, good day, Mr. Bissou. Just want to add to what both Muna and Richard was saying concerning the shift with the arrival of with the two Canadian commissioners. Around that time, those guys were the ones who really would have started the idea of strategic plan. Before that, we never really had that. So you find, as a matter of fact, it was due to them that we were able to have email as an official form of communication in TTPS. And that was done, and he would have asked the question in one of his meetings, why am I having so much trouble to reach senior superintendent so and so? And the response given to him was, well, sir, we normally send something called telephone messages. He said, what is a telephone message? And they went on to explain, well, a telephone message is an official message that is logged to the nearest station, the station where the senior officer is in, and it is logged in a book, and the officers have to take the book and carry it to the senior to show him that a telephone message came to him in case if he didn't get one, and he was totally amazed at that. He said, "What?" He was totally amazed at that, and he said, "What is wrong with email?" And in that meeting, no one could have answered him. None of the senior officers could have answered why wasn't that email system initiated, because the police service would have had computerization way back in the early 1990s. So he's saying, how come you all would have had computerization since in the 1990s and no email, so you could have easily reached these senior officers who lead the various divisions, branches, and sections. So he came along together with Mr. Yawatsky and began to ask a lot of questions as to how, if it is you want leadership and you don't have effective communication, what will really be the result in terms of how they lead the different places. So it started with, to me, I saw the shift started particularly with him, and then after that, you start to see operational plans and strategic plans. They would have even changed the vision and missions. They would have tweaked the vision and mission statement, to make it what it is now. It wasn't that back then. I think I'm subject to correction as I said that, but I know that the vision and mission statement was changed. He would have made email an official form of communication in less than a week. In less than 1 week. By way of what is called a departmental order. And he would have facilitated a high sense of accountability. In other words, the ACP must account for his or her, the persons that they supervise. The DCPs are responsible for particular roles. He never really interfered with those things to come and say, well, no, it must be done like this. He made sure those very senior positions had some level of independence in it. So I saw that. I saw a higher level of dialogue. I remember asking him directly. I came and asked him a personal question as to why he would have shut down the canteens around the country. I asked that personally, and he answered. He actually invited me to sit with him, and he said he did not sanction that, and he went on to give the reason why that was done, and he just endorsed a decision taken by other senior officers for a particular reason. So he was one that really tried to allow a more engaging among the ranks rather than the traditional alienation and who are you constable so and so, you can't come to me, or corporal so and so, you can't come to me. He tried to ease that kind of strain in between the ranks and encourage that dialogue among the ranks, whether juniors with seniors and all this kind of thing.
Right, and that's probably because he came with a more modernized approach to leadership within the police service, whereas
yes.
What he came and met was a very traditional old system of communication and leadership through lines of authority.
Yes.
So one would send something to that one, but that story about the phone book, that actually rang a bell, because I remember seeing a message book, a telephone message book, and I was asking in the station what the hell that was, and I was like, what?
Yes.
Yeah, and we had already had mobile phones by that time, and it was kind of like, what nonsense is that? Anyway, let's continue. Interesting contribution, guys. Can I leave it like this? Would you guys see it, or should I have
No, we are seeing. Yeah, I'm seeing. Yeah,
I'm seeing it, sir.
Okay, so let's see how far.
Yeah.
This is better. I know this is better. All right, so remember, so we talked about the leadership is about the nature of the relationship. And the nature of relationships is going to be based upon the value systems that we have. And if we're utilizing leadership to engage in change, and we will just leave it at change, then the quality of that relationship is going to impact upon the ability of anybody negotiating or working change through. And that is the crux of the model that we're going to be looking at. That leadership is about relationships, and the nature and quality of those relationships are going to become critical. That's why the model that we're looking at is called the relational leadership model. All right, no thing there. So the book starts by examining how we look at leadership and the frames or the visions or the perceptions or the various perceptions that we have about what when we say leadership, what we mean. So leadership can be looked through the political sciences, and that is through how we use power for how we use leadership for power and influence. So that's what the politics of leadership is about. And you all are accustomed to this one. We see this out regularly because political sciences really focus on how you acquire power and use that power to influence behavior. So that's what this is going to be all about. And some as well, this photo is just to illustrate. Yes, sir. I heard some.
Mr. Bisu,
Yeah.
can we go back to the definition you had up of leadership, please? I
Yes.
just want to ask a question. Right. It says that leadership is a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change.
Positive change. Yes.
Whether it is positive or negative, change is the word being stressed on there, right?
Right.
But what if an organization or an entity is being run in the same manner over continuously over time, right? No change is being apparent. Is it that there's an absence of leadership?
Well, there's an absence of vision because no organization can survive in an environment by being stagnant. Which is why the concept of strategic modeling and um, looking at your vision and mission and working out how you're going to make changes towards achieving your vision and mission is a critical part of the leadership model that we're looking at. Um, all organizations have to recognize that in order to deal with their basic functioning have to work in a dynamic situation. You can't expect what was being used or done in the past because it seemed to work then would continue to work in the new reality that you face. And one of the problems that you guys actually face, and I know when I worked for Ministry of Education, we have a similar thing, is that the organization does not embrace change well. And as a result of that, what happens is that when change has to be made, it becomes problematic because nobody wants to change, not the top, not the bottom, because nobody is trying to make the change look at what the positive impact of what that change is likely to bring. Is that what you're talking about? Because I know you're thinking, are you police or public or prisons?
Prisons.
Prisons. And I can understand more so for prisons because it appears as if nothing is changing.
We just rotating on a wheel, you know. We not for a lot of parts of the service we have been rotating on a wheel for the longest while, right? And if we go back to when Mr. Roger was the commissioner, that was the first real attempt at change, but it wasn't introduced properly, so it was never accepted properly. Up to today,
there were some gaps. There were some gaps with the ethical process or the value system that he was using with that, because I get the impression from other officers that there were some questionable behaviors.
Yes.
And I know it was also very unpopular as well. As with any change that comes, it challenges the status quo. And once it challenges the status quo, then people are always going to be questioning, where is this change coming from? But again, remember the model we're looking at is leadership in relation to change. Now, that's what they defined it to be. And what if you think about it, that's what all leadership is about. Leadership is about changing an organization so that it actually achieves its goals. What are the goals and objectives of any of your organizations? And how are you getting those goals and objectives accomplish. The circumstances in which you're trying to achieve static goals, right? So, any one of y'all identify one of the long-term goals of your organizations. Let's start with the police service. In terms of your vision, what is the vision statement for the police?
To make every place in Trinidad and Tobago safe or something like that.
All right, so let's just take. I'm not going to hold you to the exact wording, but let's just take that. The way in which we make places safe for the population of Trinidad and Tobago, is it going to be the same way all the time, or do we have to start to mitigate changes in the process of what we're doing? Because how do you do it when the people who you're attempting to circumvent are changing their methodology? You can't use the same things over and over again. That's the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again to get a different result. It's not going to work. You are fighting a losing battle if you don't institute some degree of change. So the same thing in terms of incarcerating people in the prison system. And I mean, one of the problems I have about from a personal peeve of mine is that having spoken to Dr. King about it in a lot of thing is that we don't practice restorative justice in this country. Yes, we tend to use prison systems as punitive punishment, where the expectation is you go into the prison, you get punished, but nothing is done to help to rehabilitate the individuals who have ended up going the wrong way. Is that true?
That is kind of the point I was getting at.
No, Mr. Bisu.
Roger and the change that he made, right? Is that the system that he wanted to introduce, the restorative justice system that he wanted to introduce at that time. We had up to this day, we don't have the programs, the infrastructure in place to support that vision, because it is not just I say do this and restorative justice will happen.
Yeah, no,
it has to be a whole approach to that has to be brought into by the government, by the NGOs, by the public, by the prisoners, by the victims.
Ooh, all right, so we have Mark who wants to ask a question, and then Bobby.
Yeah, so well, what Medina just said.
No, Bobby, let Mark go and then you'll go, right?
What Medina just said there is just proof that the whole thing wasn't rolled out properly. Everybody was thinking that was Mr. Rouge's vision, Mr. Rouge's idea, Mr. Rouge's plan. But really and truly, it was a mandate of the government at the time, right? That didn't start with Mr. Rouge. That started under Mr. Batiste. A whole task force was appointed to do a review in the prison system. Arising out of that came the task force report. I forget how, I think it's 500 and something pages long. And restorative justice was one of the things that I recommended, and the government at the time, they endorsed it, and they decided to go with restorative justice. But it wasn't communicated throughout the prison service as it was supposed to be. So officers were none the wiser as to the genesis of this whole restorative drive. And we were at a loss.
Yeah.
And to this day, I'm still thinking that was Mr. Roger's plan.
Right. True. Again, that speaks to the issue of the ethical thinking behind where those plans come from, right? All right, Bobby, what's up?
To say that things are happening in the prison service, but as we colleague said earlier, it's slow. There are programs taking place to try and rehabilitate and restore to integrate these inmates back into society. There are programs going on in collaboration with external people or organizations. So things are happening in the system. It's not perfect, they're not getting the full 100 support in terms of money and stuff like that. But things are happening.
Right. So I understand what you guys, both of you are saying, because the issue really has to be that if you don't feel like there's change taking place in your organization, well, then what's the whole point of changing leadership patterns and behaviors? And the idea is simply that I'm putting to you guys is that both organizations are trying to shift out of the traditional approaches that once led their organization. The problem with it, there are all these new views and ideas about how things are going to be done. And the situation that you face, really, hi Sheldon, um, is that if you don't have a change in the vision of the organization and the leadership to match, then you're not going to get anything happening. So you can have the institutions being given mandates to do certain things, but if your leadership structures and the way the organization works does not change with it, then what's going to happen is that you're going to get stuck. Howdy.
Yes, I just wanted to add something with respect to what Bobby and Mark would have said in relation to the prison. I think one of the mistakes that the leadership would have made in that particular instance is that the concept of restoration was ruled out before it was communicated. So there became some kind of kind of culture shock within the prison, as the case might be. Because people were not aware of what was taking place and why. What is the purpose? There was no buying into the process, and that was one of the reasons that probably led to its failure. If I could use that word, right? So that was one, and then the other thing is that the process would have been stymied as a result of that. People unaware what they're supposed to do, what their work function. There was no facilitation by the government other than providing some policy. They didn't facilitate a proper rollout of the restoration process in terms of having the programs up and running before, having the lecturers and the different logistics in place, as the case may be. So I think all of those things would have created the problem, which kind of stymied the process.
Yeah, that's actually quite true. Nigel, after Nigel, we need to get back to the presentation. So Nigel, go ahead.
What I want to say is that when you look around the world, you see countries and areas that they were experiencing high crime rates, and they attempted to employ various methods to bring crime rates down, etc. And the ones that succeeded, all of them came out and they created working papers. This is how this was done. This is how you achieve this. And just recently there was an example in the Caribbean, Bermuda, the Cayman, all those people, and they came out and they put out a paper showing how they went down to a zero homicide rate per year. And when you read through that, you see it mirrored in other places that achieved that. Now, we in Trinidad have a certain paradigm we operate in our criminal justice system under, and it's heavily influenced by the population and the emotions about it. And the population appears to be influenced by Hollywood.
Oh yeah.
And the politicians take this on board, because if you want to change the paradigm of how a service is operated, the politicians are the one who have the authority, the overall authority. They have to put legislation in place and say, listen, this is the way you are supposed to go forward. This is what we want. This is what we want done here. And you don't see that approach in Trinidad. And the strange thing is, if you bring up the approach that work everywhere around the world, you hear Trinidadian always saying that ain't gonna work here. And the very thing that never worked anywhere else yet in history is what we try and still in 2021.
All right, so it's almost like we're doomed to fail because we're choosing the wrong models. I disagree with you, Nigel, though, with with the way where power lies. Power doesn't lie with the politician. Power lies with us as the population. Problem is, as a population, we have never really learned to use our leadership and potential. Because if you think about it, legislation is a response to laws which
opinion.
respond to the needs of the population and the place that you live in. And what should drive those decisions should really be what we talked about before. What should drive it is the population should say, listen, we don't like what's happening here, and we need to do something about it. So, for example, when so you remember there are different stakeholders involved in your situation. So, like for example, let's look at the recent implementation of the tint law. Now, that tint law has been in place for a long time, correct? Looking for some
Yes,
confirmations,
yes,
yeah? But the problem,
In one form,
but the problem that has always been with in relation to the tinting of vehicles has always been the subjective way in which tinting has been tested. It was based upon if you could see through the glass, but what's going on when you wear glasses, or if you have corrective lenses, or you have some sort of eye issue? Can you accurately test what is the actual penetration of light into the tint without being able to scientifically measure it? And that was one of the things that the population should have mitigated against by this is one of the things that the population has to understand. The way to test the law is to do what, guys? The way to test the
take it
law
to court.
is to sue the government based upon the legislation. But you see, that was something that people always saw as politically oriented, because the reason why you're taking the government to court is because you are against the government. And that whole, and now we're going to be examining this two-party political system that we have running in the country here, because every time somebody does something where they're trying to bring to light an issue in the court system and then cause change, and that's the thing. When a judge rules that some behavior by some individual or an organization is illegal, what that should then signal to the system is that this legislation needs to be augmented. But our system is stagnated, and one of the reasons why it's so stagnated is because of the relative apathy of the nation and its population, because we don't force change. We always say, that is not for me. That is all your position. So the statement that you made about Nigel, that you made, that's the politician's job. No, it's not. The politicians are supposed to reflect what the population and the organizations that make up the population would like to see happen. So that
well, if I might add, what I was saying there is that the politicians actually are following the culture of the people in the country, with the
correct,
way they let this thing run right now.
right? But one of the things that I have noted in our country is that the politicians take advantage of the apathy of the vast majority of the population, because when you have a population that generally appears to not care about something, Monday fall on a Wednesday, we don't really give a shit. Then what happens is that the government can do what they want, put legislation in place that pleases them, not necessarily what the population would like. So you end up with a situation now where everybody's behaving in a particular manner, but they're not actually treating with the issues and problems that exist, because the parties that have the ability to influence the lawmaking are making sure that their position is looked after. Everybody else could suck salt. Look, for example, at the OSHA bill. How many of you are familiar with the OSHA Act in Trinidad and Tobago? And it happened not only in Trinidad and Tobago, it happened all across many countries, that the OSHA legislation was, when it was first generated, was a powerful piece of legislation that gave the office, that particular office, a lot of of teeth to be able to bring employers up to scratch when it came to occupational health and safety. But by the time that bill was done, they were able to remove the authority from the bill, so that in essence, the OSHA um, organization has very little that it can do with an organization to enforce that, or force them to be able to to act accordingly. I mean, look at the conditions under which you all operate in the prison service, um, and and the fact that you all have safety officers, correct, in the organization,
Yes, sir.
and can they impact upon whether or not you're all supposed to work in those environments or not?
The most they can do is make
Make a
recommendation.
recommendation.
Yes,
That's
because
it.
the thing is they are also beholden to the same people that
No, you had to remember. No, no, no. You had to remember the OSHA officer was supposed to be the person like it's like a tutor representative or a union representative. Was supposed to signal to the OSHA organization that there's a problem here. Come and investigate. That's the sole purpose of the safety officer, not to evaluate fully, but to identify where issues go. And then the organization will come in, investigate, and recommend, not recommend, but could put measures in place or insist that certain measures be put in place to correct what's going on. And it was supposed to be to represent both on an individual basis as well as for the entire working employee base. But the problem that took place is that those types of laws were removed from the body of laws. So that when it was actually passed and they stripped out that capacity, so the OSHA organization really ended up with just, well, we recommend that you do this. That's it. And that's as much as they can do. And I know this from having personal experience myself with my organization in terms of the what the OSHA organization could have done for me when I had safety issues with organizations that I worked in. You can't do anything. Yes, Ramesh, sorry.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
I'm looking at all the statements. I'm listening to everyone speak, and the term leadership here, I find it is more drawing a reference to rank, and I'm honest. I'm feeling that
Drawing
this
no
is a
reference to
wrong.
what? Say that
Hello,
again.
like
Drawing no reference.
it's drawing a reference to rank. A
Rank.
leader is not based on rank.
That's true.
And when we have poor middle managers, our corporals, our sergeants, be it or PO2, right? The leaders at the head with rank, right, have no other reason but to make decisions based on poor middle managers who are not speaking. Look, for instance, we are in the MGPS. There have been several years before us. These guys have been promoted. What are they doing when they get promoted? Are they just listening and saying, let everything run, let us have bad working conditions? We need to speak up as middle managers. And I think that's one of the reasons the police service has improved dramatically since I joined. Our middle managers have has been strong. Our inspectors, our ASP, our corporal sergeants have been strong, and we have a good. Have had, or even though our association wasn't the best, right? They spoke up. We didn't take SHI. I want to say the letter,
Yeah.
but we stood up and we worked to suit. Yes, there are things that we had to do we didn't like, but based on our new strategic and operational plans, we have very good transformational leaders. We expect too much from the hierarchy. We need to work and stand up and say we're not taking this. And
That's
if
true.
the,
Yeah,
the,
that's
the, the
true.
middle managers and lower managers are not doing that, no change will take place. And that is basically it. Everybody afraid, everybody fighting, they want promotion at the lower rank, they're afraid to talk, they're afraid to
but
stand up, and everything happening and going on, and will continue. If the lower managers don't speak up, it will continue out this.
but that's generally indicative too of when we look at it from a wider perspective in society. Our society has that hands-off approach when it comes to leadership, and that it is not my business, and it speaks to in all organizations because understand that in order to effect change, you have to take risks, and in order to take risks, you have to be putting yourself out there, and if you don't, then you're doomed to fail. Nigel, what would you like to say? Nigel, Medina.
Yes. All right. In my personal experience, right? In I don't want to say counteracting what Colin just said, what Ramesh just said. In my personal experience, being outspoken, take for instance this MGPS course. I applied to go on this course since in 2011, yet I was only sent in 2018. Right? The reason being is because of how outspoken I was when things were going wrong within the service around me, and they keep ostracizing me from a lot of different things, including going on this course. So other people seeing this, thinking that I might have been a strong leader or someone who would speak on their behalf and get results. When they see what happened to me, what would that leave for them when they coming up after me? If that is the example that they're meeting.
All right, that's true because you can actually use those individuals who seem to be what the organization will look at as a troublemaker and say, okay, no, we have to discipline you, or else what your behavior becomes endemic in the wider organization that you're working in, and that could pose a problem for the organization. And yes, as one of the things that they do, they would victimize individuals in the organization who are making statements in relation to change, and in so victimizing those individuals, they would say, okay, see, that's what's happening to them. I don't want that to happen to me, and that helps to press people down, to suppress their desire for things to go on. And that's something that happens in wider society as well. When certain segments of the population react in a particular way, the treatment is to beat them down as quickly as possible so that they maintain status quo. And the pressure to maintain how things are is a very serious force that resides in society. We don't want to change things. We like it this way, or whatever, however you want to say it. And therefore, it becomes very difficult when people begin to speak out for anything positive to happen out of it. And sometimes, in order to get something good to happen, you have to engage in activities that could sometimes be questionable. All right, so let's go back to the presentation here, and thank you for the slide there. So we were talking about when we talk about leadership. So far, we've talked about it. Primarily, we focused our attention from the political side of it, but leadership can be viewed from other aspects as well. So I had these pictures just to represent various world political leaders as examples of where we could look at political leadership and how it's shaped. In our situation, we could look at the political leaders in the organization. Now, another area, and this is where a lot of the textbooks tend to focus their attention, is to look at it from management. And we could think about this from all the organizations that we work in. Management looks at the effectiveness in terms of outcomes. So based upon the relationship between the supervisor and subordinates. So if you think about it from this perspective, management views the outcomes of the organization as the measuring tape or the goal that they're looking at in terms of the effectiveness of your leadership. So only if you can achieve the management outcomes, which would be more profits, more sales, more whatever it is that they're looking at, that is going to measure the successfulness of your organization. And they're still saying that the ability to get to those outcomes is going to be based upon this supervisor subordinate relationship. So I identified this gentleman, for example, and anybody recognize this guy? This is Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs, Apple.
Yep, Steve Jobs
Yes,
of Jobs. Right. As a leader, he wasn't very well liked. You're familiar with that? Why would now he led an organization that during his period or his time positioned the products that he made and the innovations that he brought to the world as being very to being the leader in technology when it came to those areas. But as an individual, what were the nature of the relationships that he developed with the people who worked for him? And in a lot of instances, the relationship was not good. There were stories that I read about him. He was having a problem with his some computer or something, and he called his own helpline and spoke to somebody there and wasn't happy with the results he got there. The following day, he went to that helpline and fired the guy. He was not an easy person to work with. I mean, people look upon him now as after the fact that he's died, and identify how good of an individual he was and a great leader he was. But really, and truly, if working with individuals like this can be potentially very difficult. But from a management perspective, from a technology and innovation guy, he was a leader. Was he a good leader? That's a good question. What about this gentleman? You all know this guy from Facebook, right?
Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah. He's a leader. He led in terms of management and still the world's largest organization when it comes to social media and social networking. Not only does he own Facebook, he also owns WhatsApp and a host of other platforms that allows him access to information, people's private and personal information that has begun to get very scary because of late they brought those organizations into question in terms of well, what are you doing to protect our information? All right. So again, leader in a field, questionable ethical values and background. Any of you all looked at the film Social Networking?
Yes,
The
sir.
Social Network, yeah.
Yeah,
And the positioning of that film as to why Mark Zuckerberg started this whole Facebook thing was very unethical. He wanted to know about some girl. I mean, that didn't take him on. This guy recently has now become the world's most richest guy, founder of Amazon. Again, questionable leadership in business, management, profits, but when you start to look at the way in which the organization operates, it's questionable about the relationship he has with his subordinates, and his organization has really questionable activities that's going on with it. So that's interesting that when we look at leadership through management, it seems as if when we say leadership and management, we're talking about performance and performance of organizations measured by profits and profitability. But does it really measure the other aspects of what leadership is, which should also be about, which is the area of its value systems? Now, another method of looking at leadership is through anthropology. Anthropology really is more looking at the historical and current systems of leadership in operation in an organization and in society is going to look at factors such as symbols and norms. So let's understand, if we look at this, this is the anthropological society. So what they look at is language, the tools, the actual individuals that exist in our society, and the organization and structures that we exist. Now, linguistics, language, culture, that type of stuff, the physical aspects. What they're really speaking to those is by looking at any culture, any organization, you can observe how leadership arrives at in those organizations or those cultures. So, for example, in most traditional organizations or cultures, leadership was based a lot with age. Would you agree with that? That the elders in the society were and have in some societies still hold automatic positions of leadership. Simply because they've been around longer and know more or have experienced more. And youth is not looked upon as being naturally a leader. And that system is what exists in the society that we're examining. Now, societies today, in modern societies, there has been sort of a flipping and flopping in relation to that. Our culture does still support the fact that people who are older are all leaders, but the idea is that should we question those leaders? Um, in the past, they didn't. Leadership was absolute. Now we can question things. So, from an anthropological vision or view, evaluating the change in leadership culture from then to now depends upon how we examine the nature of leadership through the period of history in particular, and what we look at happening now from older times, even more primitive organizations, to modern societies today. It's all about observing the culture of our organizations, culture of our societies, and how we evolved around them. And that has actually been part and parcel of one of the areas of studying leadership, because this also is going to be looking at some of the psychology and sociology involved with it. Now, another area. So these are the symbols that come with the anthropological view. Symbols, heroes, rituals, values, practices, all that kind of stuff. This is just one of the models that I pulled out here. Another way in which we could look at leadership is through the guise of history. And history tends to focus its attention upon key figures that became leaders in significant time frames of our history. And here we're talking about leading social movements. So that's where we get these individuals. Anybody can recognize who these guys are? You all should be familiar.
Roosevelt, Stalin, Hitler, Churchill.
Right. So what event are we looking at here that brought these men
World War II.
Correct.
World War II.
World War II, in particular, this individual here who was the focal point of that whole situation. So these guys rose to prominent leadership, international prominent leadership, due to the events that took place for World War II. What about this gentleman?
Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King.
Right? And he rose to prominence as a leader during the civil rights
movement,
right, in the United States.
Yeah.
What about this gentleman?
Kwame Ture Stokely Carmichael.
And he also rose in the 70s, not so?
Well, rather in the 60s. He was around in the 60s. Yeah, started in the 60s. Marched with Martin Luther King. And he was the man that coined that phrase, black and proud. Yeah, and continued onward into the 70s.
Right, and he was here for what?
The Black Power movement.
Right, 1970s. He was
he was a Trinidadian by birth.
By birth, yes.
Remember, he came back to Trinidad. Huh? He's here. Kwame Ture is what the name he took on afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? But he was part of the 1970 Black Power movement in Trinidad as well. He was one of the people who was the genesis of that whole thing. If you ever want to look at a nice movie about him, look at that movie called The Black Klansman.
Oh yes.
That he was actually featured in that. It was they were attempting to assassinate him when that whole Black Klansman thing came up. All right, so I'm glad that some of you all knew this gentleman. Well, a lot of people know this gentleman, and he rose up in South Africa. Yes, in relation to the apartheid movement,
Right.
the social movement against that, and became the first black pre- president of South Africa. Who eating lunch at this time? Yeah, you're punishing people.
You're
All
trying
right,
to cook
you're
something.
trying to cook. All right, so from the psychological and sociological view, leadership is looked at in terms of looking at it from individuals and from groups and how they interact. So these kind of like show us here in terms of some views of what are bosses and leaders. So I like this one because what is the difference between a boss and a leader? A boss is somebody who drives employees, and a leader is somebody who coaches and in other words, it coaches and inspires. So which kind do we normally see? For the vast majority of us, we might see the one who's driving employees.
Yeah, the bosses.
Yeah, the bosses. Whereas now they're both in leadership positions, but are they acting in a manner that helps the organization grow successfully and with good feelings? Because if you look at the characters on their journey, you would notice that their expressions are much more different in terms of their perceived levels of happiness. So that's something for us to pay attention to. So you work in organizations where you have bosses driving you around, it's not a very enjoyable situation. Whereas if you're in an organization where there's good leadership, then you have people who feel happy to work and enjoy their contribution, making contributions to the organization. So those are things you could look at.
At least if you have succession planning at the top of your organization, then obviously you wouldn't want a boss.
Well, if you do, yeah, if you have proper succession planning, then yes, you can ensure that those qualities of inspiration and that kind of stuff can be carried on. But a lot of organizations don't have succession planning because it's difficult to do that when you aren't engendering certain types of leadership potential. And that's something that we'll also look at as well when we start to examine this. Now, I brought up these three guys here because they represent a collection of theories and developments that have a long-lasting impact on the leadership model that we're looking at here. Now, these three guys, this is Freud. He has a lot to do with the development of psychiatry and the concept of the id and that type of stuff. This gentleman here is Karl Marx, and he was a social entrepreneur and he anthropologist, and he actually developed a lot of the theories that dealt with understanding society, and some of his theories have been useful. And this person here, anybody recognizes this gentleman here? Very important in education, in particular adult education, B.F. Skinner. His thinking is actually one of a number of a beginning of what we started to look as
Behavior modification.
behavior. Well,
operant conditioning.
Correct, very good. And he also developed a lot of theories and concepts and ideas when it comes to andragogy as opposed to pedagogy, which is the methodology of teaching adults and educational theory. So there's a lot of it in terms that influences our current view. Yes.
Excuse me, can you repeat that term? Androgogy, what?
Andragogy. So, have you heard pedagogy? Pedagogy is the teaching methods that are utilized to educate in secondary schools and primary schools. Andragogy was a theory, or is a theory, I should say, that differentiates between methodologies utilized in adult education as opposed to pedagogy. Like peds and andro, you understand the distinction there? Pedagogy meaning for children, andragogy meaning for adults.
Okay, right, sir.
You understand?
Yes, sir.
So it's just a methodology area there. So BF Gooder, Skinner is also going to be critical because a lot of his theories influenced the leadership models that we're going to look at that fall into different categories as well. All right, so we've already discussed this, so we'll skip this question, but it's something that you can be looking at in terms of how you're going to be examining your field of study and think about it from this perspective, especially when you start to reflect on it. All right, so I like this statement. It actually comes from the text as well. The superficial leader cannot see how things happen, even though the evidence is everywhere. The leader is swept up by drama, sensation, excitement, and all his confusion is blinding. But the leader who returns again and again to awareness of process has a deep sense of how things happen. And I saw this image from during the era. So do you remember when the last president Trump removed
when he withdrew from the Kyoto Protocol.
yes the Paris agreements? Yes, when he removed himself from it, and they were trying to convince him to stay in that particular thing. And I looked at this here, and he is the epitome of that statement that we just made here, where superficial leaders cannot see how things happen, even though the evidence is all around them, because they're swept up by the drama of the moment. Whereas leaders who return again and again to awareness of process has a deep sense of how things happen. And to me, he is the embodiment of the first, and she's the embodiment of the last, because these people realize the importance of what you're doing because they go back and they think about things. Whereas this gentleman here simply just reacted based upon what he thought anything was like. So I felt that was a very interesting put there. All right, so the relational model that we're going to be looking at is one that sits upon the background of the psychological and educational framework, which is why B.F. Skinner is going to be important, which will require learning about self, learning about yourself, self-awareness in the context of others, understanding your personal values, beliefs, and commitments. So these are the requirements that we're talking about. So you have an assignment where you have to do your own self-awareness evaluation. There's a chapter on that you're going to be dealing with. There's a chapter on this as well as the third area. So what we want to be looking at is the development of your own self-awareness, which is going to be the start point and probably the most critical part of the development of your own skills in developing further your leadership capacity. Self-awareness, and to relate that back to the picture there with President Trump, has to do with making sure that you reflect upon what you do and why you do. So self-reflection and reflection on things around you is going to be important. Effective listening, collaboration, compromise, and practice. Now, what is effective listening? Anybody? How do we effectively listen?
We're listening right now.
But how do we effectively do so? What's the number one requirement for being able to listen effectively?
Giving somebody undivided attention.
That's part of the process of effective listening.
Giving them feedback.
That's also part of the process.
So I think one of the things of effective listening is that you have to have a genuine concern for the person who you are listening to, who you are speaking to, because when you listen to them, you have to be able to know
Right. Yeah.
take
Empathize,
yes,
Empathy,
yes, yes,
sympathy.
yes,
all
yes.
right, good. So you're starting to get there, but what else is required?
You must know yourself first. If you
Well,
establish-
we understand that, but one of the things that in doing
Open-mindedness.
sorry,
Open-mindedness, an open-minded approach.
what does open-mindedness mean?
To me, if you have to be in terms of an open, unbiased, unprejudiced kind of a approach in terms of what the person is saying to you.
non-judgmental.
Non-judgmental. So those type of things, basically.
Right. So that you're correct. That is the most important part of effective listening. It's called suspension of judgment. And you have to put aside your own value systems to listen effectively to somebody, to engage in mutual understanding. Because that's the goal of and far too often when we listen to people, we listen with our own sense of what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. And we don't listen to what their perception is, but we simply listen to what we think is right about it. And
But could you really shut that off?
sorry?
Could
No,
you really shut that out?
what I'm saying is that for you to get to become an effective leader, you have to practice shutting that down. Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to say to you. It's not simply, it's not an easy process. It's a process that requires practice. Everything we're talking about here requires practice, because without effective listening, you can't collaborate effectively. Because collaboration means giving up control, giving up to somebody else's, and you can't give up if you don't suspend your own judgment of what is right or wrong. This is one of the reasons why group activities create so much problems, because in the collaboration process there is the conflict of what one person's perception is correct procedure as opposed to another person's perception of procedure, or what is right. And that conflict leads to the issue that impacts upon how the collaboration works. And it also develops the requirement here now for compromise, because knowing that we're going to come to things from different positions requires that, all right, we need to find some form of compromise. Now, the problem is, if your value judgment or your system of value judgment is so hard-grained that you can't even listen to somebody who has a different point of view, then you can't get to compromise and collaboration, can you?
Not at all.
Yeah, right. Which is why in the development of leadership, the practice of self-awareness, starting with self-awareness, because you need to understand that when you listen to people, why do I react the way I do? Why can't I, or why do I have problems listening effectively? That whole process here is where we start, and it requires constant return to practice, which is why practice is going to be part of the whole process of development of leadership. All right, and this model is going to speak to you to that. We're not saying that you have to, and this is part of the problem. A lot of people perceive that. So I remember when I taught communications, when we defined communication was the exchange of information between two or more individuals with the goal of mutual understanding. And I always added the statement that mutual understanding does not require agreement. And a lot of people said, well, that's not communication. Now, what did I mean when I said mutual understanding doesn't require agreement? Because that is actually is effective listening.
I can see you, but I don't agree with you.
Right. But when the problem that happens is when we tend to not agree with each other. We don't agree. We also tend to judge each other, and that is where the problem comes up. So for me to really understand somebody else, I must be able to listen effectively to them, to be able to understand why they're thinking the way they are. Even if I don't agree with their position and their point of view, I still need to listen effectively to understand why that individual is there, why they're positioning themselves in this manner. And that is a difficult thing to do because from time we come across certain topics in particular, about, and I'm going to bring up one here now that is of particular interest, and that has to do with violence to women. Let's talk about that because it's topical at the moment, um, and in particular, violence towards children. All right. If you've grown up, if you have to actually speak to somebody, and for some reason or the other, they don't see a big problem with that, and you have the reaction that we normally have, God, this person is a monster kind of thing, and whatnot. If you cloud your mind with your own personal judgment of good and bad and what is right and wrong, while trying to listen to somebody who's trying to tell you, well, I just do this because so and so and so, you're not going to be able to effectively listen. And the problem is effective listening requires that you suspend your own judgment in somebody else's thinking process or value system. And that is a serious challenge that we face. I expect that maybe some of the officers among us here who may have engaged in intense discussion with victims and perpetrators of criminal activity have to practice some sort of an effective listening, but the effective listening is for a different purpose. All right. Would you guys agree with that? Is there
Yes,
anybody?
possibly.
Yeah. Again, I mean, effective listening for different functions or purposes is something that we have to pay attention to. Especially, I have to bring that to mind when it comes to people who may have been engaged in interrogations. Most of you guys engage in interrogation or train in interrogative procedures.
It should be.
Right. I mean, especially if you're at detective and investigative levels, right?
Yeah.
All right. So the idea is that you use different
They call it,
skills.
they call it interviewing now. We don't use the word interrogation.
Interviewing, right? We don't use interrogate anymore.
That's the politically correct way of saying it. Right?
All right, but
Potato patata, man.
we're still interviewing with a goal in mind of trying to find out, well, what I can about this particular witness or this individual who may or may not have committed something, right? All right. So, but my point being is that there are different skills sets that you're going to utilize for different things. So, one of the things about effective listening is suspending your own judgment, and that is a difficult thing to do, especially if you've grown accustomed to listening with your own judgment system sitting inside of determining what's right or wrong, and that's yeah.
Something I've noticed on the media, especially I'm going to call his name with Fazir Mohammed. He when he does an interview, right? My take on it is that he has his question, but he also has the answers he wants to hear.
Oh yeah.
And when he's interviewing somebody, if he doesn't get that answer that he wants to hear, he begins to badger them, and in some instances, he's rude towards them. He is abusive towards them, and the same can apply to us also at times. Sometimes when we're speaking to someone, we, as you rightly say, we become judgmental, and because of we have our preconceived ideas, opinions about them. If we don't get that out of them, we begin to judge them and so on. And I think
don't you think that is one of the reasons why it should maybe listen to, because they like to hear him It's all that way. A lot of radio and television
Probably,
shows are based upon a formula.
yeah.
Because let me put it bluntly. If you're not bacchanal going on, what's the point of listening to that? You understand? It's not going to hold your interest for very long. It might be informative, but it's not entertaining.
And that's the culture of Trinidad and
It's
Tobago.
not only the culture of Trinidad and Tobago, it's the culture of, in particular, it's the culture of radio and news stations in the States. That is the model that they've run off. If you ever look at talk shows coming out of the UK and European countries, you don't see that kind of baiting and stuff going on. You know, we have it here.
The badger, the
Badgering and stuff like that.
yeah.
It's the, but you see it in the United States. If you look at talk shows and that kind of stuff, it's worse on their radio programs because there's no visual to go along with it. Although now a lot of radio programs have the internet feed that you can actually see what's happening in the room. But we've gotten this formula that seems to be popular now, which is part of that whole reality TV nonsense that goes on. Unless you're choking somebody, and especially if the host sees a problem with your point of view, they're gonna chuck at it because it makes for more confusing discussion. All right, even they
But
call it.
this is what they call now the post-truth era. So opinions matter more than facts.
Correct, and
This era.
that's the problem that we face. That the opinion is more important than the fact of the facts of the matter, and that is that's one of the problems that we face here because and we also have to take that into consideration that for an individual, and you all might not like this statement or take it as you will, but try and understand it. Reality is perception, or perception is reality. What is the reality to any individual is their perception of that reality. So what you may see or I may see is not the reality that somebody else thinks they see. Which is why when you talk to individuals about the same event, you'll get as many people who are there, you'll get as many different positions or views of it. Because perception is reality. And that is a problematic thing that you could be looking at. And it becomes even more so when people are unwilling to listen to other person's perceptions or point of views of a particular situation or circumstance. So those things are problematic across the board. And it's something that we have to address in the leadership developmental model that we're looking at here. All right. So we understand these developmental requirements: self-awareness, effective listening, collaboration, compromise, and of course practice. Then we have foundational principles of the leadership model, and the first one is very important because, again, it starts with leadership is of a concern for everybody, and that's why we're doing this for everybody. Far too many of us are, we take a back seat when it comes to leadership situations. We have to appreciate that it's viewed and valued differently by like, for example, even in our own circumstances here. I'm sure that if Miss McIntyre is still on the session, I think I saw her there when last I was on. Her view of leadership and its critical nature is might be less, or well, not less, but different at this point in time in her life than it might be in another point in time in her life, as expressed by how some of the guys are feeling about it now. Ms. McIntyre, you care to give us some feedback? Yeah. She's still on, guys? I can't see the pluses.
Fall asleep.
I don't know.
Yeah, she's there according to the
thing.
Yeah.
All right.
Still on then.
All right. We'll get back to her in a bit, I see. All right, so we understand that whole variation in views differently values by us. Um, it's a dynamic situation, it's not static. And in essence, basically, different settings call for different types of leadership models or leadership types, which is true. I mean, where there's a situation of urgency, you may, in fact, can you remember the basic types of leadership that you have come across? Leadership models, autocratic, bureaucratic,
democratic,
those kind of things. Right. So you think a bureaucratic or democratic system might work in a situation where you're dealing with an accident? What do you think might work best? Let's say you come upon an accident or you are involved in an accident. You might have to use a more what? What type of style in this situation like that?
More autocratic style.
Autocratic style, yeah.
Yeah.
Because again,
as a responder.
Yes,
yeah.
Especially as a responder.
You have to take charge of the situation and direct people.
Correct. That's correct. I remember having to do that myself when I stopped to help somebody in an accident, and a police officer came on site. Now I'm a first responder, but I'm not like I don't have the labels and stuff. I'm just trained as a first responder for the college. And there was this guy. He had something impaled into the lower part of his stomach that was on the door. And the police officer that came on site wanted to yank the door open. I had to stop the man because if he had pulled that door and caused that thing to pull out of his stomach, he would have been in serious problem. It would have killed the fellow.
Yeah, bleed to death.
Yes, and that's because as a first responder, I didn't anticipate this, but I understand that not all officers are trained in first response. It's not part of your training, which I found was funny.
Not medically trained, you mean?
No, first responder trained. I'm not medically trained. I'm trained as a first responder.
Oh, okay.
Which is, how you deal with certain injuries and stuff on an accident site. Because in a lot of times people die in accidents not from the accident itself, but by what the first responding people do, which is grab them and pull them out of the vehicle, and that could be more dangerous. All right. Anyway, leaving that alone. So we understand different types of settings call for different types of leadership styles or types, and of course, the main thing is that these types and styles can be learned and developed. All right. So, requirements for the development of these things. It requires a commitment to the highest ethical standards to encourage change and social responsibility. To be able to do that, we require critical thinking, credibility, authenticity, integrity, and ethical conduct. So these are things that we keep on talking about in this program all the time. Not just this course, but this entire program. We're talking about the development of critical thinking. What do you all understand by critical thinking?
I see it as just actually really thinking. Assessing situations properly and in judgment based on
looking at a process and diagnosing, looking at the process, understanding the beginning, understanding the end, and knowing that the steps that are in between, and if there are problems, if there are things that might hinder from achieving,
right?
Come up with answers and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So I mean, the program. Yes, sorry. Say that again.
Yeah, I was just kind of building on what Booty was trying to say in terms of a holistic approach in decision making. So what are the cons, the pros and the cons, and so on. I think that all that ties into aspect of critical thinking, taking all the information at hand and utilizing it in terms of a decision.
All right. Naisha, you can actually speak out if you want. Huh? I see she puts into the chat analyzing the facts, and that's part of it. Yes, she's correct. Analyzing the facts of the situation and evaluating it in such a manner that you can determine what might be a correct course of action. Right. So critical thinking requires removing as much subjectivity and using more objective approaches to arriving at decisions through various processes. Naisha, can you speak? Because I was asking you a question earlier and you weren't responding. Still not responding. All right. Credibility, everybody should be familiar with that because we talk about that in a lot of instances. And credibility, authenticity, and integrity tend to be linked to each other. Would you agree? How are they different? Credibility has to do with us believing you. Authenticity is your level of honesty. And integrity is a combination of your credibility and authenticity. Integrity is the value system and structure. So the three of them are related. Yes, you'd agree with that? And underlying all of that is your ethical behavior. All right, your ethical conduct. And your ethical conduct is going to be shaped by your value systems, which we'll come into in a little bit. You guys can see this here? All right, so
yes.
All right, I'm gonna just make it a little bigger. I want to be able to, look into the chat and stuff from time to time. All right, so the three basic principles that this leadership developmental model is going to require is this starts with the knowing element. You must know yourself, you must know how change occurs, and you must understand and know why others view things differently than you. And that is where we come back now to effective listening and compromise and understanding. The knowing part of the process is going to be critical because after knowing, all right, so let's look at this. This is a nice exercise here. If you guys can see, you may have seen some of these before. What do you see in this corner here?
An old woman.
And a young lady looking over her shoulder.
Right. So somebody's seen this before, right?
Yeah.
Right. Who's not seeing what? So there are two pictures here, or two ways of perceptions. Or in fact, there was a time I did this and somebody came out a third way. Can you see the old woman and can you see the young lady? Can everybody see the old woman and the young lady?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. The woman is the other one to see.
Uh-huh.
Yes,
What
sir.
about this one down here? Is this a duck or a rabbit?
Both.
Both.
A duck with a bus.
A duck with a bus end? Or is it a rabbit with the ears pointing in the opposite direction? You understand what I'm talking about? So
yeah,
perception.
This is why we talk about perception and understanding why people may see things in one way. And this one here, the little cartoon, is even more important in terms of understanding how people could look at the same thing but have different perceptions. Both of them are saying the same phrase, but this is perception and reality. Are they saved?
Oh,
no.
Exactly. So the person who's on that deserted island, seeing somebody coming, is perceiving that, hey, this person's coming to save me. Whereas the person who's been floating outside there for God knows how long, rowing in, seeing somebody standing on the shore, thinking, this person's going to save me. And the reality is, both their perceptions are incorrect, and or of course they're not incorrect because they're perceiving each other as each other's solution, but at the same time it's not necessarily going to be the result that they're looking for. So those are things that I always thought this exercise was pretty good. I think you guys may have seen this perception index in UBI.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So there are lots of them, by the way, but this is probably one of the most popular ones that you could look at. All right. The next, so we said the first part is knowing. The next part is the being. You must be ethical, principled, open, caring, and inclusive. Now, ethical, we'll come back to a lot of ethical. Principled and ethical kind of speak to each other. Open, being open-minded, caring, and inclusive. Now, what does inclusive mean? What does that require of us to be inclusive?
Diversity, looking at people who are diverse.
Not just looking at.
Well, including
Open-minded.
Encourage teamwork.
So this is more difficult than it reads, because being inclusive means that when you are looking at an organization and you have to work in teams or you have to work with other people, you have to be inclusive of everybody, even the persons you don't like or you don't see eye to eye with.
And their orientation and so on.
Yes, especially if you think you have ethical values that are in direct contradiction to somebody who is against your ethical values, but you still have to be inclusive and open and caring towards that individual. So some of the principles we have may be based on, well, as with anything, is based upon our influences around us and the life we've lived and so on. But can we be open and willing to work with somebody who's transgendered, for example? Have you all ever had the opportunity or the situation where you had to work with somebody who's transgendered?
No. No.
Did you understand what a transgender means?
Yeah.
You think so? Sorry?
I strongly suspected, so you know what, I can't talk.
Yeah, but again, the idea is.
No, I think there are different things in mind.
I think so, but what about if we just use the concept of somebody who's maybe effeminate? What about that? Somebody who behaves more like a woman, but is not necessarily a woman, or somebody who behaves like a man who is male, or sorry, somebody who behaves like a man but is more male, is a female. You understand what I'm talking about? That's a type of transgendering I'm talking about. I'm not talking about somebody's sexual preference at this point. I'm just talking about behavioral.
They have talents. They would have their talents and so on that would add value to the organization or the whatever group you're dealing with.
Yep. But how open and caring were you to those individuals? And that's the challenge. The being part, the knowing part is one thing. Because remember in the knowing part we said, we talked about understanding why people's views are different. Again, remember that? Now we're talking about including and caring about them.
I think Trinidad as a society and a whole, we arrived there as yet because of so many reasons: spiritual grounding, our upbringing, our culture, and so on. We are. Some of us not well. I don't know, including myself. If we're really there and ready for it as yet.
And we have to remember that that is part of the challenge that we face in leadership models, in particular this one, because for us to arrive at situations where we are more inclusive and caring of individuals, we can't be using value judgments for that purpose. Because if you think about it, if you and joining an organization, did you have a choice over the people that make that organization? Did you all get to choose the people who became police members of the police service or the prison services? No. The decision of who came in was supposed to be one based upon a selection process that was supposed to be unbiased, not so?
Yep.
In the selection process. So again, when people came into the service, if you end up as you have now, because now you have rank, you end up in leadership and senior positions, you then have to be open to all their thinking process. However, if we think about it now, the organizational culture beats certain type of differences out, not so?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you see how the whole organization itself could be uncaring and uninclusive in itself, because it pushes people to margins and eventually pushes them out of that organization because it doesn't tolerate that behavior. So you understand how difficult the being part is if you're going to be developing this leadership model. This is one of the guys who I thought, who at least in his some of his behavior has reflected that caring nature as a leader. You might be familiar with Virgin Records or Virgin Airlines. And he has stated that unless you care about the people that you work with, then you can't bring out what's best in them. And I thought this was a useful quotation from somebody who might be the epitome of the caring leader. Have you ever
that Jeff Bezos lacking?
Sorry?
That's the quality that Jeff Bezos is lacking, which is why he has some complaints from his employees.
Yeah. That is quite true. Yes, that is one of the issues that Bezos is thing, because in order to meet the criteria of the business, you know, just throwing people to the wolves kind of thing. Somebody has a question?
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh.
Oftentimes in our organization, when you sit in on meetings and probably at various levels, they would often use the statement, we don't have to like each other, we just have to get the job done. But what Richard Branson is saying here is that, you know, you have to have some element of care. So can you not like a person and still care for them and get the job done?
No.
Exactly.
That's the point that I'm trying to make. But understand that the challenge of caring about people who are not like you, or who have absolutely different concepts of what life is like and what is right and wrong, is the challenge that you're going to be facing, because the whole situation is that you don't get to choose a lot. Now, in terms of
I think so. You could not like someone's personality, but you can still care about them as a person, as a human being.
true, because you don't have to agree with their position and point of view, but it makes it much more difficult, doesn't it?
I could understand not agreeing, but I can't understand not liking.
Not caring.
Yeah.
I think only personalizing this thing, I don't think too much. I don't necessarily have to like you to do the right thing by you.
That's what I'm saying. You mightn't like the person's personality. You wouldn't look for them as a friend. You wouldn't go out to them and line with them. But just the fact that they're a human being, they're working in the organization with you, you could work alongside them. If you know it's lunchtime and the person ain't eating anything yet and you stepping out for lunch, you could ask them to want something to eat. Because you would like someone to do the same for you.
But one of the problems that we tend to have, though, is that we tend to do that more for, we're quite willing to do that for people who we genuinely like. But even if you don't like somebody, you extend to them courtesies. That's the whole point that I think he's trying to make here. But generally, you can't interact with people if there's not some level of respect and well, what does like people mean? You understand what I mean? That's a big statement. Huh? So I mean, as a quote, it's nice, but at the same time, what does that mean? You understand? In terms of the content that we're looking at here, principle open, it doesn't put a value judgment statement there of liking, but you have to be principled, open, caring, and inclusive, regardless. All right. But what I'm saying to you, the challenge that you're going to face is doing so with people who challenge your own basic principles of what you believe to be right or wrong. And that is the problem that you're going to face. All right. But I understand the issue that both of you. The last part is the doing part. You must act in a socially responsible way, consistently and congruently, as a participant in a community, and on your commitments and passions. So what does that mean? It means that we have to we have the knowing, the the being, and then the doing. So it's that three-part series of things that we're looking at here. So acting socially responsible, consistently and congruently, and participating. This is straightforward. If you want to be that leader that we're talking about, then this is what is required of you to do. And again, it is not necessarily going to be an easy thing. That makes sense, guys?
I remember somewhere in one of the chapters where they spoke of the kind of condense the qualities required for leadership as concern for people and concern for performance. And
Yes.
they say that is the most common thread that they could find throughout all the different styles and types of leadership. And I
Yeah.
think that when it concern for people, we come back to the same liking thing. You don't have to like somebody to be concerned about their well-being.
Correct.
If especially if they fall under your
Exactly. If
especially
you
if they
like
fall
somebody,
under your charge,
yeah.
right? As a member of your team, you should be looking out for everybody.
Correct. But my point about it is the point about it is that it's more difficult if you don't like them. So the people that you don't actually have any kind of feelings towards are the ones you have to be even more careful with. That's I think is the situation, because it's easier to be supportive and caring and open to somebody who you already feel some degree of, hey, this is a cool person, I like them, kind of thing like that. But the person who you don't have that reaction, or you have a challenge having any kind of positive reaction towards them, are the ones that you have to be even more careful, to be more considerate, because those are the ones that you're likely to marginalize. And that's the point I think that Branston was trying to make. That you should be liking everybody generally, but if you can't, then those are the ones you have to pay attention to, in terms of making sure your behavior doesn't indicate that you're biased more towards those you like as opposed to those you don't. Okay, and that speaks to the concept of consistent and congruent behavior. You have to act the same way consistently and in all situations, right? And that's the point that you're trying to make there. Yes, somebody was trying to make a statement.
Yeah. From experience, I found that a bit of empathy and operating with fairness does make it so much easier to deal with people. It
Correct.
actually make your job something like a million times easier.
Yes, that is quite true. Quite true. But it is still going to be a challenge to be consistently behaving in the same way in all situations with everybody. All right. Okay. So this is something here about corporate social responsibility. This is something that we talked about a bit in terms of acting socially responsible. So this is what we talk about, corporate social responsibility. This is the reason why I brought this up is because a lot of organizations today are talking about their corporate responsibility, and corporate responsibility is broken up into various areas. One of which is being socially responsible to the organization and the society that we live in, and they're talking about it being long term. That goals need to be socially responsible. The use of resources, their processes in terms of sustainability, their behavior in terms of ethics, in terms of their output and their throughput, as well as their inputs, being responsible to the overall environment, market, sincerity. This is just a model of what corporate responsibility should be looking at in terms of their behaviors. Now, the reality of this is that leadership is not something that can be reduced into simple steps. It has to be realistic and developed. Right. So it's realistic. It develops a way of thinking. It, it is a personal philosophy of leadership and identifies core values that can help you work with others towards change. Now, this is the whole concept of leadership. It's not a formula, but it's something that has to come from within. It has to inculcate your own personal values and ideas to be able to be brought to the fore. And that's going to be something that you all would want to look at in terms of how you're developing and how the process is going to help develop yourself. All right. The leadership development process actually involves changing your paradigms away from the concept of hard work to, yes, hard work is important, but instead of just working harder, we're talking about working smarter. And when they say work smarter, we're talking about collectively smarter, reflectively smarter, and spiritually smarter. And collectively smarter is simply an indication that when we work in groups, we are collectively smarter than just the one of us, although some of us have some serious problems with that. Reflectively smarter means that we need to be reflecting on what's happening, what has happened in the past, in order to look at what we should be doing in the future. Far too often, we don't reflect and think about what we're doing and let those past behaviors impact upon the improvement of our behavior or decisions in the future. So that's one of the other elements of working smarter is all about. And then spiritually smarter is, here we're not talking about religion, but we're talking about being aware of the values, beliefs, and principles that become our guides when things get rough. And you can see this in people in terms of when you look at leaders and how they behave. When things go wrong, what do they do? Those it's quite easy to talk the talk and when things are going nice and easy, but when things are rough, what the person does speaks to their own underlying principles, and it's something that you want to pay attention to in yourself. How do you behave when things get bad? So spiritually smarter is being aware of what are your baseline principles and beliefs, because when push comes to shove, those are going to be the principles that guide your behavior. And if your principles are flawed, then your behavior is going to become flawed. And as leaders, that's something that you have to correct if you think you have challenges there, or if you've fallen short. Because nobody's going to be perfect, but we need to be aware that this aspect exists. So when we say paradigms are patterns of looking at things. And we have already started to talk about, in the earlier discussions, about changing paradigms in leadership. And our current leadership paradigms that exist in organizations that we probably serve in, or in the society that we live in, are paradigms that ought to be changing, should be changing, or are they changing? Those are questions that we want to answer. And what this leadership development process is going to ask you to do is to look at the fact that we need to be changing our paradigms about how leadership works. All right, and that's what this course is going to ask you. It's going to ask you to look at making change. All right. Now, how do you know when change is required? Well, most times because change is required because, not because of change itself, but it's because it's become necessary. Because whatever we were looking at before no longer holds. It doesn't work anymore, and that's part of the problem that we face in today's environment. Yes, change is taking place, but is it taking place at the speed and the type of change that is required for the situations that confront us? Let's look at the and it's not that we are not capable of doing it, because if we look at the change that took place in society with the coronavirus, the capacity for change and rapid change is there, isn't it? So we fool ourselves when we make those statements that I'm too old to change. People change behaviors quickly. Mask wearing, washing hands, being isolated. I mean, think about the change that you guys went through just to continue your schooling here in this program. All right, it's not as bad as we think it is, but understand that change is always going to be a challenge. All right. Can you guys? I mean, some of you guys already spoke about paradigm shifting in your own organizations, but what about paradigm shifting in your personal experiences? Can you talk about that? Anybody? Look at this paradigm shift here. Leadership is not something a leader possesses so much as a process involving followership. What do y'all think about that paradigm shift in thinking? For those of you who read it.
I agree with that. I agree with that 100%, because I think over the years there's a overemphasis on leadership and not so much attention being paid to followership.
Uh-huh.
Right? Because the thing is, you expect the leadership training to equip the leader to train the followers in proper followership. But sometimes it is not as easily accepted coming from the person who is to be the leader as it would be coming from a neutral third party, as the case may be.
So, in other words, leadership is not something that should be taught only to the leaders. It should be something that is taught to everybody.
Correct.
All right.
Correct.
So that they would understand that leadership really, part of leadership is followership, and followership is leadership in itself.
And one day the followers will be in a leadership position, and what they would expect at that point in time is what they should be right now.
Right. So, question: when should we? When do you think in life? Now you're a prison officer or you're a police officer?
Prisons officer.
All right. In either case, when do you think you should be looking at a program like this? As you are on near the end of your 33 years, or at the beginning of your 33 years?
At the beginning, I mean, all that is part of the succession planning. It could start from the very inception.
Recruits, right? Yeah.
Yes, yes. What is required of you as a subordinate officer,
and as a potential leader in the future, correct?
Who will eventually work their way up to a leadership position. So practice from now what you intend to be when you get there.
And this is one of the reasons why I've always found that pulling you guys out of the service and sticking into this program is great. Yes, it helps. But this is a program that should have been offered further down the organization. But I don't know. Something that's
but even the progression from one position to the other, one rank to the other, there's hardly any kind of preparation,
appropriate training and preparation.
any kind of training, right? It could be the person who's going to be taking over the new position.
Yeah.
Exactly what is expected, how he or she should operate, and that sort of thing. Kind of sensitization. They just expect you to be around the those offices or those positions long enough so that you would learn on your own.
And it doesn't always happen, does it?
It doesn't always happen. It doesn't always happen that you are so close to people in those positions to hear what they're speaking about every day. They see what they're doing every day and that sort of thing. Sometimes in a remote location.
That's correct. That is quite correct. I've actually seen that happen in having to do some training recently in the inspector's exam. I was doing some training for that, and the overall thing was that they're trying to kind of formalize the process and how certain things are done, but they have to overcome the culture that was developed in the past. So that a lot of that has to do with a lack of understanding that leadership training ought to have started to take place much earlier in the process. So, but we understand this followership thing because understand this: if your followership doesn't follow you, you're not a leader. So that's it. Let's get this right. You could call yourself a leader, but if you have no followers, you're nobody. Understand that? All right? Because in essence, to get anything done, you need to be able to get people to inspire people to want to do the things that you would like to get done. And there are challenges with that. And that thinking is one of the things that we have to get our leadership to appreciate. And as you as leaders, you have to remember that you can't get things done without inspiring and motivating the followership to follow along with you. All right. So I like the way it's brought into the end here. Followership is really leadership in action among people in groups. So followership is leadership in action. So interesting. That's quite nice. So follower types. These are the type of followers you're likely to come across in your organization: politicians, partners, subordinates, and contributors. Now, what we're doing is we're measuring on this scale the relational initiative of the individual and the performance initiative of the individual. So you have from low to high on both axes. So a politician is somebody who has low performance initiative, but high relational activities initiative. Whereas a partner is high in both. Contributors are those who are high in performance but low in relational. And of course, then you have the subordinate who falls into the category of they don't like developing relationships, nor are they doing anything. Where would you fall as a follower? There are other follower types too. Huh? You have loyalists, sycophants, critics, opportunists, spectators, traitors, realists. Those are different types of followers that you can get as well. Where are you?
I think in some of our services, we more have the alienated followers.
Right. Which one is that?
Who, like the people, the yes people, sheep, survivors.
Yeah, survivors.
Well, I the opportunist, Mark.
Yeah.
Right.
All of them around.
Yeah, you have people like that. They tend to be the realists.
In the class groups.
Yeah, you can have them in this 4 matrix here. Yeah, in cross groupings, you can have the partners who do work and help out and get everything done, and they work with each other in terms of communication and whatnot. As opposed to that, you have the one, yeah man, we could talk and we'll meet here and there, and they ain't doing anything. High perform. Now the fact of the matter is that because followers fall into various kind of types and categories, you have to understand that you can employ them appropriately. Understand? So, but the hardest ones to work with are subordinates because they really just basically don't want to do anything. So, first of all, I want you to consider where you are in terms of followership, as well as what you would like as a leader. And it's not always going to be the partner. Why would the partner be a problem? For some leaders.
Might feel threatened.
Yep. Partners, especially for somebody who is insecure in their leadership position, a partner can be somebody who may challenge your position of authority. And that is something that we have to be paying attention to. All right. In Trinidad, we have all of these here. And of course, we have the ones who don't do anything. In terms of follower types, you have those who are just totally apathetic. All right. All right. So what are the responsibility of followers? Offer support to the leader. That goes without saying generally. Take initiative. That's something that some leaders don't like. So you have to be careful. But also understand what the nature. Play counseling and coaching roles. That is towards each other as well as the leader. Raise issues and concerns when necessary. that sometimes some leaders don't like that. Seek and encourage honest feedback. Again, some leaders don't like that. Clarify your rules and expectations. Yeah, you want to know what you're supposed to be doing. Show appreciation. Now, good leaders tend to show appreciation to the people who work with them, but it's very difficult sometimes where you're leading organizations and your followership doesn't show appreciation for the types of leaders. But generally, we tend to hopefully have a healthy relationship like that. Keep the leadership informed of what's happening. That's important. That's a communication rule, backward and forward. And of course, resist inappropriate influences of the leader. That one is tricky sometimes. So these are the follower's responsibilities. What are the follower competencies? Displays loyalty, functions well in change-oriented environments, functions well on teams and groups, thinks independently and critically. This is critical, especially if you want to be able to resist the behavior of certain leaders, and considers integrity of paramount importance. Yes, that is quite true, because you don't necessarily want the leader to be telling you to do things and you don't, and it's impinging upon your credibility and your integrity, because you will pull the leadership into question and tell them, I'm not doing this. This is against our rules and regulations, or just simply the thing of being good leadership across the board. Now, is the term follower a good term for us to use? Can you think of other things that you could suggest? Some organizations use associates. Think about it from that perspective.
See, the book referred to some of them as participants.
Yeah. I know there's some organizations that refers to them as brother.
Constituents.
Constituents. Yeah. But what you're trying to escape from is the concept that followers sound like sheep. And that's one of the things you want to try and get away from. These are my supporters. These are my
team players. Yeah.
That's why we refer to them as, my associates, that kind of thing. We give a different kind of suggestion to the level of importance. All right. Okay. So then you have this here. Sorry.
Yeah, some kind of derogatory.
Yeah, we have to discourage that. All right. So this is the other model that you were talking about in terms of effective alienated followers, sheep and yes people, as opposed to survivors. This is the model somebody was talking about. Again, this is from PB in terms of where you fall in terms of your level of independence and critical thinking. All right, passive to active kind of stuff like that. So, and behavior. Again, you have to analyze your followership and see what kind of people you want. Do you just want blind sheep? Yes, people. You want an effective follower, or do you want the alienated follower? And then, of course, you have the survivor. So again, followership is a critical thing that you want to be paying attention to, and evaluating the type of followers that you have is also going to be important as well. Because the problem with sheep is what? Another shepherd can take them away, yes? The problem with yes people is that they're not necessarily going to be honest. They're just doing it because they know that they're going to get something from it. So they expect something from it. And that is not an honest way of getting things done. So we'll look at it from that perspective. All right, leadership styles. Of course, we have the classical leadership style, the laissez-faire autocratic. Then you have situational, emergent, transactional, transformational, and visionary. So I think we're going to be looking at this in more details in the other situation, where in one of the other chapters, we're going to be looking at the various styles of leadership. in much more detail moving forward. All right. Suffice it to say, when we talked about the types of leadership that you're going to be utilizing, this is what we were talking about, based upon the circumstances you find yourself in. All right. So the leader defined as any person who engages with others to accomplish change. So you are all part of leadership. Anybody who engages in any sort of activity with others has the potential to be leadership. Purpose of leaders to motivate. Now we could take off the word employees there, but it's to motivate. But generally, they are to motivate other peoples to attain organizational goals, to ensure that rules that are followed, provide continuity and momentum. This is what we talk about with succession planning, continuity and momentum. Making sure that whatever we're doing, we're not just going in jumps and starts, but we have some sort of level of continuity. Embrace and foster change, work to the common good, display social responsibility, civic engagement, and civil responsibility. So I think I went on to explain a little more about social responsibility. This is a personal commitment to the well-being of people, the world, and the public good around us. So we don't do things in our organizations or in our everyday activities that will be against the well-being of people in our world around us. So we don't go driving on the road too fast. We don't engage in polluting the environment and that type of stuff. All right. Civic engagement is having a sense of responsibility for your community, meaning that if you see something happening in your community that's not good, you do something about it, or you don't do things that would be dangerous for your environment, or either through your action or inaction. I can think about keeping your house or your environment around your home clean, because you have a sense of responsibility, because we have mosquito season coming up with rain, mosquito issues coming up with rain and whatnot. So you want to make sure your place is clean and tidy so that you don't foster mosquito breeding in your property. Yes, you'll understand that kind of thing in terms of civic engagement. Other aspects of civic engagement and talk about volunteering in activities in the community. How many of you all do any of this stuff? Now, I know some of the officers might get engaged in this out of some of your actual duties in the communities you serve. But think about some of these activities here that are discussed or identified that you may have gotten engaged in. Any of you all engaged in any of these activities? Get through. Any of you all belong to clubs?
Yeah, church groups and so on.
Correct. All of those things are part of civic engagement. So just that's you know. That's the
community groups, church groups.
Yeah. Any of you all active in the police youth groups in the country in various parts of Trinidad? Civic responsibility, the sense of personal responsibility individuals should feel to uphold their obligation as part of any community. Right. There is in our country, we have diminished civil responsibility. We don't see our actions as being pertinent to. A lot of times, this is one of the reasons why you have such bad littering in Trinidad. We don't see that we are responsible for that happening, because in other countries, civic responsibility is something we insist upon each other happening, because it is part of what we expect as a community. So um, when you see people dumping garbage, and here we're talking about, they pull up on a truck and they're just offloading rubbish on the side of the road, which I've seen a couple of videos like that, where people were being filmed, and you have this public shaming that tries to take place, and you have most people just don't bother about it because they know why nothing is ever done. Yes, a lot of people will go ahead, continue doing what they do because they lack a sense of personal responsibility to the society and the community that they live in. And it's especially true where you see people who are engaging in the dumping of rubbish and looking after their own property. As long as my place clean, brother, everybody else could suck salt. You don't care about what what happening as a result of what you're doing, but you only care about what's taking place in your immediate environment. Other people is not your business. But then when the whole place flood up, then it's everybody's problem, right? The that sense or of diminished civic responsibilities, one of the areas of apathy that affects that type of situation, and it stems from leadership. Because leadership should be trying to envision with people, hey, there's a need for us to be all civically responsible, and this is part of the things that we talk about here. And as officers, both in the system, you all can see things like, I mean, who actually looks out for doing jury duty and stuff like that, going to school, obeying the law. Obeying the law is a hard one, and when you say obeying the laws, obeying the law regardless, and paying your taxes. Well, nobody's want to pay taxes. Um, and as a result, we have a lot of people who pay no taxes at all in our society. All right, so all of these things are part of our duties and responsibilities for our our thing, our society. Engaging in community service, voting. Well, we don't have mandatory military service. Displaying patriotism. Our patriotism is dependent upon what happened at any point in time. When you're outside of Trinidad, then you want to be real patriotic. But inside Trinidad, patriotism is sometimes looked upon as, there's a double-edged sword to patriotism, guys. Just to be on the safe side here. You can actually become patriotic to the point of being very problematic in it becoming too overly being overly patriotic, and to neglect and basically, nobody else is better than you kind of situation. There's a difference between that level of patriotism and just being proud of where you come from and what your country is, displaying it as well. So there are things that there's a line, there's a gap between them, because I know when we speak about some things about patriotism, there's some problems that come to mind with that.
Yeah, it's more like being and with nationalism.
Yes, that's right. You're correct. We can start to get so patriotic that we start to border on fanatical patriotism, and that's what we're trying to get away from. There's a healthier level of that, but all of these things here speaking to, if we are patriotic, then these are actions we should be engaged in. All right. So, should the leader know everything? Is a question for everybody.
I would say no.
Right, and the correct answer to that is no. Leaders require one, as a follower, we shouldn't expect leaders to know everything. One, and two, as a result of that, leadership requires openness to learning. And again, we have to remember all of us are smarter than one of us. So it means that as a leader, we have to both understand and expect that we don't know everything, and that other people don't expect us to know everything, because that is part of the problem. There are some leaders who will lie and tell you something, give you an answer to something, when in truth, in fact, they have no clue what they're talking about. And that's dangerous, because that's where you can end up misleading people. And that can be a critical issue that comes up. All right. Group learning, including that learners need to be made, make sure the environment is open to learning. Now, organizations, well, the good thing is that both your organizations have sent you to do some leadership studies and overall developmental studies. And that's important, because if your organization does not support learning, and as a leader you don't support an environment that is open to learning, then there's a problem. And you notice something: open to learning, making mistakes, and sharing knowledge. That is a critical thing, because learning means taking chances and possibly making mistakes. But if you make a mistake and then it means the end of the world, then there's a problem. Organizations that don't understand that that type of mistake making is part of the learning process, and sharing that knowledge about what happens when mistakes are made, or how to just get things done correctly, is part and parcel of the learning process, is going to be an important element that we have to pay attention to. Yes, Neil.
Yes, sir. I was just looking at this same statement you're making here. Um, at what level are you talking about when we're talking about making mistakes? Because I know in the TTPS, when mistakes are made, it normally results in a lot of litigation, and really is a heavy cost.
Yes,
So
I understand.
at what level in terms of making mistakes? Because in our organization there are certain mistakes that cost
Tolerances
a lot
for
and
I,
damage.
I
Yeah.
I know this was going to come up, and that is one of the situations that we have to pay attention to. But understand, aren't mistakes made?
Yes, sir. Yes, mistakes are
Right.
made.
But how are the mistakes treated with? That's the issue we're talking about.
In some cases, the mistakes are not treated until when the litigation reaches, and then you realize, well, okay, a mistake was made.
Right. And part of the reason why you can't recognize when mistakes are made is because people don't talk. They don't share knowledge.
Correct. Correct.
And that's why we say, if you want to reduce the amount of errors that are made in a process or in the way in which things are done, then you have to make your organization open to learning and understand that mistakes will be made. And we need to help share knowledge to be able to reduce the occurrence of that mistake. That makes sense?
Understood. Thank you,
Right.
sir.
Now, I know in the
If
medical
I can
field,
add to that,
yes, go ahead.
when you say that a lack of communication presents addressing the mistakes, what he's speaking to in terms of matters end up in litigation, and that ends up becoming public record. It's on the media. The political directorate will know about it. If you go on the High Court's website, there's statistics pointing out how much money is spent by the states in rectifying said mistakes, etc., etc.
Mhm.
So again, this is a question for leadership. I think it will happen when it comes from, let's say, the finance minister who had to pull the purse strings and pay when they fed up pay. Then you will see something.
Right, yeah, because they were losing cases that were being, and people were winning, and the whole point about it is that it really is, if there's no process in place for people to act. Because I know one of the problems that happens with prosecutions is that you all have something called police cases, right? Where you guys have to argue the case in court.
We have police prosecutors that are
Right, that's what I mean, police prosecutors. And they have to go and do some training in legal stuff and whatnot, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, I have a friend who's a defense attorney, and he always tells me he is welcome when a police presenting their police arguing cases, because the level of training that he undergoes as an attorney is much more intensive in terms of his preparations for courtroom, and a lot of times he's able to undermine the credibility of the police and their presentations by poking into the mistakes that they've made in the gathering process and presentation of the material. Now, how do we avoid that? How does your organization go about looking at protecting its members and putting the best case forward? Who taught you how to go and present a case?
Mr. Bishu,
Yeah.
not all the police prosecutors are trained.
No. But understand
some are just thrown into the lions then
that's what
and live themselves.
That's the point. The point should be that part of the training requires that officers who are likely to end up having to argue cases before a magistrate or a judge or whatever ought to be trained in appropriate, even to give evidence. Because he says he is murder. Well, I should say those words. Is that he's able to undermine a lot of police testimony because of the mistakes that have been made in gathering the information and presenting it. And there's no way to correct that unless the organization itself opens itself up to understanding there are gaps that require us to train and learn so that we could reduce making mistakes. But the part of the thing that this model is telling us is that if we're not open to learning and we're not open to understanding that mistakes will be made, but what we do is just simply punish people, it's going to cause the organization to clam up, and it is not going to allow them to want to share information and learn about the situation. You follow what I'm talking about, right? All right. I want you all to go through. I think we still have a few more slides, but I need to. This is about the learning models and stuff like that we're going to go through here. And whatnot. So we could pick this up when we come back next time. But I want to end on this openness to learning and this situation, because it's a good place for us to pause for the evening. Understand that all leadership organizations require that we do pay attention to learning from mistakes. But if a mistake is made, it can't be the end of the world for any participant in the organization. That making sense to you guys?
Yes, sir. Let me just share something with you, Mr. Lisu. I have a former batch of mine who is now based in the Canadian Police Service. And basically, they have a unit, and the sole purpose of this unit is to review circumstances where the police may have made missteps, errors, or whatever as the case might be, and develop training modules so that they could rectify it. So at any instance, once something occurs that the police would have probably faltered in or had some that type of shortcomings, they review it immediately and develop a training module to correct it immediately.
Hi, Audi?
Yeah, it frees up a bit.
Yeah, I lost you there for a bit, actually.
Yeah.
All right. So I understand, but you see, what I'm saying is the Canadian Mounted, the Royal RMCP you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Right? The Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They are an organization that went through the same process like Trinidad and Tobago many years ago, and they modernized their system. And they engage in active learning things. They put things in place to make sure that we learn from it. And if there are problems, then we engage in the necessary training to bring us up to speed. You understand? Or bring them up to speed, I should say. As one of the and again, you remember their police service came from the same place that ours did, which is from the British system of the constant. I can't remember what they call it, but we came from the
Constabulary force.
constant. Right, that's I can never pronounce that correctly. Um, but yes, that is the force that they came from, and but they have modernized their system, and even Scotland Yard, they've changed the way they do things. We have stuck with a situation or an organization that remain rooted in that ancient system that was put upon us, and we never saw the need for it to evolve and change. So therefore, now we're playing catch up. So the things that we see in other organizations are things that maybe we could look at implementing in ours. What stopped that from happening is the leadership and its leadership's willingness to allow those things to come on board. All right, guys, I need to stop here. So let me pause the recording, and I will put this recording up on the site for the people who missed it. All right. Anybody has any questions they want to ask before? So Nigel, you had your mic online open there for a minute. Yes. All right. I'm gonna.
I just made a comment, so turn it off.
All right. Okay. Well, go ahead, Nigel. Make a comment before I close.
No, I had already made the comment.
Okay. All right. All right. So we'll stop. I'll stop recording here for now.